Well, it's nice to have everyone here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll keep letting people drip in. And we'll get this party started. We have, I'm going to pop out real fast and do this mode so I can get the links ready because we've got some good links to share throughout today. Great, obviously, to see a lot of the folks that we were with last week, and we'll be getting into doing a share back about that time briefly, but a big welcome to Kelsey and others who, it's just great to have you all here in our in this community space. And we just welcome this as an open space to ask questions and engage over chat or just over Zoom. So great to have everybody here. We'll run through some upcoming events and then get into today's agenda. This is a shared call between teams. We have Registry and Science and then Foundation as well, and Nana's representing Regen Foundation today. So we'll be pinging between us on updates and then spending a good amount of our time with the discussion. But for events, we have this Thursday, we have Regenerati News Hour, and that's actually going to be with Justin here, who's on the call, and a few others. And I'm imagining it's something that's going to be around data. So look forward to Thursday's call on Twitter Spaces. And then we also have the next community call is going to be on product and protocol. So for those of you who don't know, we switch off between community calls focused on Registry Science Foundation with calls focused on product and protocol. So that will be October 10th. And then from there, we've got the next Regenerati News Hour. The next environmental stewardship meeting is going to be the end of October, October 24th. And that's a call that Ned stewards. And I think that might be one where we share back around some work with smallholder focused environmental stewardship methodologies. So look forward to hearing from there. And then we'll circle way back around on that same day to the next community call with Registry Science and Foundation. So if any folks have any things that they would like to surface for one of these community calls, please let me know. I'm happy to hear what people want to check in on. So for today, as I said, we're going to start, Tiga's going to do a share back on the Regen Summit from last week. There's a group of our internal team and some external folks that work together in Massachusetts. So we'd love to take a minute to share about that time, that really rich time together. Then we'll run through a few registry updates, really great things that are coming down the pipeline from our program, and then also from like these credits that we're going to be talking more about today. Then Nena will do a run through with some foundation updates and some work that Shayla is doing based in Africa and some of the events that the foundation has been stewarding through Climate Week. Then lastly, and a good chunk of our call today will be a discussion with the group that worked on the sheep grazing credit. So that includes Ned from Regen, as well as Kelsey Brewer, a researcher that was involved in the project. So again, Kelsey, thanks for joining. I think that'll be a really nice time for us to sit with and celebrate all of that work, and then to think about how we're going to get those sold. But they're alive in the marketplace. This is the project page for Gurgitch Hills Estate for those credits. So great to weave in there. So from here, let me switch over to the Regen Summit, and Tika, if you want to do a share.
Yeah, I'll do a quick share out, and then please, anybody that was there, feel free to pop in and share out as well. But it was great to see everybody in person, our internal team, and then some amazing community members that really added to the richness of our time together. So working on open crediting and governance, and we had Pear there, as well as Open Earth and Silva and Econavi. And so a whole bunch of folks just kind of coming together that we speak to on a regular basis, but really got to work through questions on what is the registry, what's the value of the registry, how we're operating in the space compared to other registries. That includes governance, folks from DAO, lots around data sovereignty. So just kind of covering the whole gamut of what it looks like to have a project, to start a project, to work with other community members on the project in different areas around the world, and bring that through methodology process. Oops, sorry, and onto a credit online on our marketplace. Which throughout that process, there's just a whole lot of different steps that we were really excited to work through internally, and then be able to work through with this group of community members that came and are doing work kind of in the specialty along those steps. So yeah, it was lovely, and thank you for the Regen team, for Gregory, and for Sarah and Alex and all those who made that happen. Yeah, it was great.
Thanks, Tika. We during the time when we were there, we were collecting resources and articles from, especially those written from the group present, just kind of the collective work to date. So we collected those, as well as a lot of the presentations and notes, into a shared Notion hub. And if someone would mind, yeah, thank you, Alex, in the chat, you will find that Notion hub. And so if any of those questions that Tika brought up are of interest to you about what is Regen Registry, what are our values, about governance of Regen Network and Regen Registry, and then open crediting, or some of these specific projects that were shared, hop in there and check out those notes, and you can loosely engage in that way. So we'll keep that. I'm sure that there's just a lot of momentum that's going to keep unfolding from it. But for now, that's kind of where we're landing a lot of the notes and presentations.
Yeah, and anybody else that was there that's on this call who wants to share a reflection, please do. I'd love to hear.
I could share very briefly. I got a couple of reflections from some of the folks who were there with us. Just that, and I felt this too, just that it was a unique balancing act of sharing kind of a community context, right? We're all here gathered around Regen Network and a set of open source tools and a kind of an approach that oftentimes we don't take the time to level set and inquire deeply into what the registry is doing and what's going on in the token and how it all comes together. And it's a complex stack and vision for this new open institutional common centric approach to what we're talking about. And every human who's there is also leading these amazing innovative projects, supporting Indigenous people in the Amazon, or Indigenous people in the Great Plains, or farmers in the Midwest, or wherever people are doing great work. And it was a unique balancing act to get bandwidth and attention, and really having people leaned in around the common problems and opportunities, as well as all of what that enables, what having kind of this common infrastructure that we all uplift and contribute to and co-govern, and how that can empower these really specific awesome projects that are live, like Kevin with Sea Trees and other stuff. So I was really at the end, just really excited and grateful for how well that balancing act took place. And definitely big kudos to Austin, who did a lot of the facilitation at the foundation. And we missed everybody who wasn't there.
On that note, I was lucky enough to go. I share the sentiment shared here. I think one of the biggest things that I took away is that we're in a bit of a moment where people really have a hunger to put pen to paper and make things happen, and collaborate. And I think that, like Gregory's saying, it's always a balancing act, especially when we're blending worlds of like the open source, the open, the collaborative, and the private, and all the dynamics in between. But I would like to kind of offer myself to the group, if it's useful, to say, since I feel like I'm a little bit of a connector in this ecosystem, if those of you that weren't there, or maybe even those that were, just want to hear more or want to know how, but just want to talk about the dynamics of the situation, or maybe how you can kind of fit in more, please feel free to reach out.
A really kind offer, Justin. Thank you. If there's a way that you want people to reach you, you want to drop it in chat?
Good thinking. We'll do that.
Justin. Any other brief sharebacks or reflections from last week? Righty. Well, if anybody does, please feel free to, well, Sarah Baxendale would love to hear from Jan. So if someone wants to be put on the spot, then they can, but otherwise,
Second that.
okay, all right, this is a chance. Anything from them? That's a no. Okay. Please pop further thoughts and reflections in the chat as they arise. I just I feel like there's definitely, as someone was mentioning earlier today, like there's a dust settling, and there's a lot that we'll be moving on. So thanks for those shares. All right. Next up, we've got some really exciting registry updates. It feels strange after all of the work that we've done to be kind of like celebrating, but I want to be able to take this moment to celebrate that we have our first registry native credits live in the marketplace. It's a big deal. And I think just a lot of kudos to Ned and to all of the team that was involved in the Kilo Sheep Hour credit class and credits. So big thanks to all of that work and the innovation there. It means, I feel like, so much for us as a team to see these things alive and out in the wild, but the work doesn't end there. So we want to sell these babies, and we've gotten some sales already. We want to really push that forward. So for sales, please contact David Fortson, who, I think, Dave, you're here. He's point for sales. So if you have some leads or some ideas, please reach out to him. He's kind of shepherding that part of the process. And I'm dropping in some links now to the credits, as well as to like the credit class and methodology. So want that to be really available to everyone. So this link that I just popped in is for the credits themselves. Next up, which is has been the fruit of a lot of work, especially from Sam and Corey, is an update to our program guide. And our program guide for Regen Registry outlines the rules and requirements, kind of the boundaries for all projects that run through Regen Registry. And there was a lot of work that detail a lot of the legal relationships. So if we're talking about the credit class admin and the registry agent and the project proponents and how those rules interact with each other. So it's really exciting. Thanks for sharing that link, Sam. It's really exciting to see this mature, and we welcome those to just, here to jump in and review it. And we'll be continuing to do these big upgrades to it, but this is a great upgrade.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just to chime in there, I think one of the biggest upgrades that came with the new version is really exploring and solidifying the different on-chain roles that we previously hadn't really connected to off-chain roles and responsibilities in the project development and credit issuance process. So for those interested in reading, I would pay particular attention to the relationships between the credit class admin, the registry agent, and the project proponent, which are on-chain roles in the eco credit module with different responsibilities around managing credit classes and issuing credits and things like that. This was our first kind of proposal at saying what those on-chain responsibilities actually tie to in the real world as it relates to reviewing documentation, holding liability around the integrity of a credit. So yeah, and we're inviting feedback. So if anyone has feedback, please share that in the high-low space.
Sweet, thanks, Sam. Do you mind to pull up the link to that and share it, please? Thanks. Next, we have a public comment that's coming up for Carbon Plus Grasslands, and this, to remind everyone, is a methodology developed in-house primarily by Giselle Booman, and it is for soil organic carbon sequestration and grazing systems. And so the methodology has gone through expert review, and now we're reaching the point where the credit class is being upgraded, and we'll also be going through that process as well. So I want to give Giselle a minute to share kind of some of that context and what this means for this methodology and credit class.
Hey everyone, so this is a very good, a very big milestone for the science team and the registry. This is our first methodology that we generated in-house, and we didn't we hadn't gone before through a formal peer review. So we built the methodology based on a lot of peer review, I would say, and a lot of consultation, but this is the first time that it's been going like through the formal process that we are also requesting to the rest of the methodology developers that they go through. So it made sense to do it. So we got excellent peer reviews that we're going to be putting on public. The dates are going to be between the 10th, so starting next Tuesday up to the 24th. That is the period where the 2 weeks of public comment are coming, and I'm preparing webinars. So my intention is that I'm going to be preparing something to level set everyone on what are the methodology basics and what are the upgrades, what are the differences between the past versions and now this version that it's coming like refurbished and super powered, I would say. So one prompt for the public, for the audience, if you can put in just one sentence in the chat any intentions of what you would like to see as a webinar. So I have different ideas. For instance, I would like to see to get feedback from one webinar maybe very focused to methodology developers and to scientists, to go really deep into the science changes and upgrades. And then maybe another one more related to land stewards and implementation, because there are a lot of barriers, for instance, for implementation, depending on the soil types, etc. So I'd like to hear both sides of the coin, but also it's, I don't know, I get enthusiastic about putting both sides in the same conversation. Because there are tensions between what scientists want and what land stewards and project developers want to implement. So if you have any ideas of what would be, something that is very compelling for you, please just post here one sentence and we can compile that and I can generate the webinars according to your suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks, Giselle. That'll be really exciting. And we'll be posting about whatever webinars end up being developed. We'll be posting about those in the Regen Registry high-low. So we'll be sure to seek that out there. And then in newsletters as that timing works out. Thanks for sharing, Giselle. Really excited for that. The last items for updates for our team are projects that are on the horizon. We have Colson Carbon Trust, and they have the biochar methodology and credit class that are in our libraries, and their biochar pilot project that's based up in the Pacific Northwest. They are working towards finalizing their pilot project. So that's looking at greenhouse gas emissions and reductions and removals for biochar. And so that's the burning of materials in the sense, we're talking about kind of wood waste without oxygen to create an amendment that can be applied in this instance to in-stand forests. So really great to see that coming up. And Howard, if you have anything that you wanted to add to that for a minute with that pilot project.
That's a good scale up. The credits attached to a pilot project that Regen Network, Regen Foundation helped Colson Carbon Trust develop last year. And we had good results from that and a lot of learnings. We're now in the process of verifying and validating the credits, and that's moving forward. What I would note is it was followed with a community biochar project that we did in conjunction with our county conservation districts, in which we got quite a lot of visibility and interest in biochar within our region here. And our next step, and we're very excited about a scale-up project in which we're looking to connect with the agricultural community. We have some very significant organic farms in the county to the south of us, and we're connecting them with biochar, running some science experiments, and we're in the process of fundraising so we can do this right and get a demand pull for biochar to support expanded low-tech, medium-tech, and perhaps a high-tech pyrolysis facility, so that if we are successful, biochar will be all over the place, and we'll have some real carbon banking within our bioregion here. So, and I want to give real recognition and appreciation to the Regen team that has been our partners throughout the process and helped us figure out how to connect the credit class and to do the work. It's been a really gratifying partnership with the team here.
Thanks, Howard. Goes both ways. The other pilot project that we have that's moving is using a methodology that's in our library by Ecometric, and they're based in the UK. They are using a approach for grasslands and croplands for soil organic carbon sequestration using it's similar to the Carbon Plus Grasslands methodology and using some other tools like neural networks. So be sure to check that methodology out, and we're definitely excited to get those credits landed. So that said, I want to be able to pass over to Nena with some foundation updates, both on events and then some things going on. And just let me know when you want me to switch slides.
Okay, thank you. This was the event that was hosted as a collaboration between Earth Law Center and Regen Foundation. So this has been a long-standing partnership, and we have been developing a white paper. It's mostly Austin working on it. He has been working with them to develop a white paper on autonomous ecological states. And the white paper is supposed to be out this fall, and we would circulate it once it's ready amongst all of you all. And this was an informal meetup that came through this partnership, and apparently I was not present, so I can't really share much about what really happened there. But all I've heard is the turnout was great, the vibe was great, and people had a lot of fun. So it seems like this was a successful event that we managed to host during the Climate Week. Next slide. Yeah, so Shella has been focusing a lot on working with Kenyan ministries in working with other African policymakers to have rights for land stewards and indigenous communities, because carbon markets is becoming a more and more big thing that has been pushed by the Kenyan president and other African presidents, and the rules are a little bit not so ethical. So she has been deeply concerned, and she has been joining a lot of working groups to basically advise the governments on and give feedback on how it can be made better to sort of reflect the ground reality, and also resist the sort of certain laws that can cause more troubles regarding land deeds and other things for the indigenous communities living in those regions. So I would, if you want to know about any of these things, I would recommend you contact Sheila directly. I can post her email on the chat. And if you want to know more about what's happening in Africa, you should definitely reach out to her. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so we are very excited to announce that this month we would be officially kickstarting our cohort 2, and the first call will be held on 11th October 2023. These are the list of members that we have. I think it was already announced last week, but I put it here in case you missed it. The main focus of this group has been like communities that have interest in developing methodologies on the region stack. So I think there is a lot of potential for a lot of cool work in collaboration with the Regen Registry happening through this cohort. At least that's what our hope is. And we have a very diverse group that wants to approach the idea of credit creation and methodology creation in unique ways. For example, Chatafisha is a Tanzanian group that works a lot with waste pickers, and they collect a lot of plastic waste from the ocean and from the nearby regions, and they are really interested in making bricks out of those waste and possibly create a methodology out of it that could directly benefit the waste pickers. So a lot of these approaches that we are seeing is like a bottom-up approach on how like methodology creation and credit creation can really affect the people at the very bottom of the pyramid who often get ignored in these processes. That was pretty cool to see, and they all come with a lot of enthusiasm. Other thing that I must say is some of these groups like Econavi and Foundation for Regeneration, which is led by Brian Weinberg, a lot of them also come with quite good technical knowledge, and they also have a footing somewhere in the validator side. So we are also seeing this cohort as like as a starting point to create this bridge between the technical validator community and the land steward community, so there can be some kind of information flow that is happening on both sides, so they can both learn about it. And we are very excited to experiment how this could happen. And so anybody who's interested in meeting these groups, please write to me and I can invite you to the introductory call on 11th of October. It's just a way for us to give them a warm hug and say, welcome to the Regen family. And we figure things out from there. So if you want to introduce yourself, say hi and drop by, please write me an email and I'll add you to the invite list. So yeah, that's about that. And additionally, Sheila and I have also written a response to the permissionless credit class creation proposal that is, I think, going to go for vote soon, if I'm not wrong. So I must say that this perspective is purely coming from a place of, like, for Sheila, it's coming from a place where she works a lot with on the ground communities in Africa, specifically in Kenya. And for me, it's coming from a perspective of being very involved with working with community staking DAOs. So that's the position that we have written this this sort of piece on. And if you're interested, I can share the link in the chat in 2 minutes, and you can have a read and let us know what you think. Yeah.
Thank you, Nana. Yes, Gregory was already asking for a link to that. So yeah, go ahead and drop that in. It's great. Thank you. Excited for cohort 2. We are going to move into discussion with the group of people responsible for bringing about the sheep grazing credits that are within the environmental stewardship framework. And I don't want to say too much, but I do want to encourage us to not only listen and ask questions, but to also put on the hats of those that are really activated and being asked to get these credits out and sold into the world. So I know that that's something that I'll be thinking about, is how we can better, more deeply storytell around these credits, their meaningfulness in and of themselves, and as a part of this new initiative, the environmental stewardship framework. So with that said, I'd like to pass to Ned and Kelsey, and I'll check the room and see if the any other folks like the grazers were able to join.
All right, thanks, Becca. So maybe just to kind of set the context and let people see what this is all about. We've got a few photos. Could we just kind of go through the next, I think it's 8 slides or so, just spend a little bit of time on each and people can see. So this is, basically the idea is to graze sheep, lots of sheep, kind of high density sheep for short periods of time. And Kelsey can give a little bit more of an eloquent explanation of how that practice works. But you're basically putting a bunch of sheep in an area of a few acres for a couple days, a little more, a little less, and letting them eat the grass down to about 1 inch or so, and then they move on to another one. And it's just kind of keep that going, and it's been shown to be very regenerative. Could you go to the next slide? And this is basically the way they move the sheep around, is they've set up these temporary fences. They're electric fences, and that's probably what keeps the grazers busy most of the day, is just setting up and taking down fences, because you basically have to create these new paddocks, these new areas where the sheep are grazing, and it just involves moving these portable electric fences around. Next, and this is just they're using dogs for protection and also to keep the sheep in line. If you've ever seen demos or videos of sheep herder dogs, it's just phenomenal how they're trained and all that stuff. But this is just that's Jamie and Robert, and I was hoping they could join this call. It looks they're just super busy. I mean, they're managing tens of thousands of sheep. So I have a feeling they just couldn't join the call today. They were on a call last week with the environmental stewardship community meeting. So if anybody wants to see that, I can post the link in the chat. So you could hear some, from their mouths, you could hear what their work is like. Next. So this is just an overhead view of a vineyard with a bunch of sheep in it. And then on the right is kind of one of the products that we're getting from the sheep, which is helping to fertilize the soil and all that. And again, Kelsey can talk a little bit more about the explicit benefits that we're getting from this. Next. This is just another view of sheep, and typically from the data that we've got, the average is between, I'd say, 350 to 500 sheep in a few hectares. So that's how many sheep are grazing in one area at one time. And the shepherds that are watching these sheep, they need to keep an eye on them, because once the forage, once they've eaten so much and they start to get hungry, they'll try to break out of the fences. And that's one of the greatest fears Robert and Jamie seem to have, the grazing operators, because you don't want to have 500 sheep running down a highway or a main road somewhere. It's something they try very, very hard to avoid. The next one. Again, just more sheep in vineyards. And then they're just 2 more if you want to go through those. Just another overhead view. And then the last one is just these are the grazing operators, Robert and Jamie, and they're working with their own sheep, but they're also during different seasons they're collecting sheep. So I think this year they were grazing something on the order of 20,000 sheep that they're putting in trucks, moving around to different vineyards. It's mostly vineyard grazing at that time of the year. That's I'd say kind of December, January through March maybe when they're grazing. So Kelsey. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but could you just give a little overview of your dissertation research, and if you want to comment a little about your thoughts on the methodology? Kelsey was one of the reviewers of the methodology, and he was by far the most active reviewer. He really shaped this credit to what it is today. I mean, I don't have any experience with sheep grazing or much of anything even closely related, so I relied on a lot of interviews and things like that. But Kelsey provided a lot of great insight and tweaks to make the methodology really scientifically robust. So any comments you have about that, and also things if there are things that you think could be improved. So I'm going to pass it on to Kelsey if you don't mind, and be good to hear about your work.
Well, that's kind of you, Ned. I really appreciate that. Actually, if you wouldn't mind perhaps passing me permission to share my screen, I could kind of give a little bit of a narrative on the subject. It's a somewhat short presentation, but kind of to your point, Becca, the idea of crafting a kind of story around this and also its perceived benefits.
Kelsey, you should be good.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll try and be brief. Are you seeing my screen all right? Cool. All right. So as Ned said, I've spent the last 8 years of my career as a researcher at the University of California in Davis. And I'm a soil scientist, trained soil scientist, but housed in the agroecology lab. So predominantly studying the ecological management of farming systems, the design and management of farming systems. And through that process, got connected with Fibershed, who of course was, and very important in commissioning this work to be done. A collective and collaborative of grazers, predominantly grazers and fiber producers. They connected me with Robert and Jamie Irwin, who Ned brought up, Chaos Sheep Outfit, and I kind of followed Chaos Sheep Outfit around for 8 years, just trying to kind of get an understanding of how the system works and use soil kind of as a lens to evaluate the outcomes of the system. And through that process of 8 years, we started, it just was not a very common practice. Jamie and Robert were the only ones that I was aware of that were doing contract grazing. Now, I mean, I personally have met over 30 different contract sheep grazing outfits in California. Their viability, continues to be kind of a difficult economically, but credits like this hopefully will help them. But we've seen a rapid expansion of the number of vineyards that want to be implementing this practice and the perception that vineyards have of the benefit of grazing sheep in their vineyards. And when we think about grazing sheep in vineyards, it's a type of what we call integrated crop livestock system. And so actually globally, over 75% of agricultural operations in the world are some form of integrated crop livestock system. You can see here this idea of traditional ICLS, integrated crop livestock system. And the idea here is that the animal, A, the crop, C, and the pasture, P, components are integrated together. And in the vast majority of contexts around the world, these are subsistence farming systems, little or no or very little inputs into the system, and as such, very little losses to the system. So highly efficient agroecosystems, but the outputs often can be very low. And we compare this to the United States and kind of industrial farming kind of context where you have a segregated high intensity agricultural system, this HIA up here in the top left, where you have animal and cropping systems separated from each other, so decoupled from each other. They have massive amounts of inputs into the system, massive amount of outputs from the system, but they're highly inefficient systems. So there are lots of losses to the system. And kind of from a design perspective, these new ICLS systems are trying to integrate this idea of coupling back together animal, crop, and pasture components to where the waste from one system is kind of the benefit of another, reducing the need for external inputs into the system, making the system more efficient, so reducing losses while maintaining the outputs of the system. And theoretically, this is known as an ecological concept understood as internal regulation, which is the ability for any ecosystem to internally recycle its energy. And we're going to frame carbon here in this case as a synonym for energy. Carbon is energy. So the ability for an ecosystem to internally recycle its energy and nutrients, and through doing so, maintain its ecological functions internally without the need for external inputs and external kinds of regulatory mechanisms like petroleum, right? We put a lot of petroleum into agricultural systems to regulate their functions. And so the idea is instead displacing that, using the energy in carbon to drive internally the functions of an ecosystem. So this results in improved capacity for the ecosystem to function, but also to store soil carbon. We'll kind of go a little bit into it, but essentially this kind of flux and movement of carbon through the ecosystem driving functions is the very process that also results in stable stored carbon. The next thing that I would frame is this idea of ecological disturbance, because grazing is a type of disturbance. It's a type of ecosystem disturbance, and we'll frame disturbance as a change to the physical habitat or the resources of an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is the physical habitat, the resources, and the organisms of an ecosystem. And so a disturbance would change the physical habitat or the resources. So that could be the form that the resources take or the total quantity of resources. And so through doing this, we can see that agriculture is just essentially a series of disturbances, everything from inputting amendments into the system, applying compost or nutrients or water, right? That's a change to the resources in an ecosystem, to harvesting or pulling crops or, animal products out of an ecosystem. That's removing resources from the ecosystem, to cultivation, tillage, and grazing, right? These are all kinds of disturbances that change physical habitat and resources. And so these disturbances happen at different levels, right? They happen at a single organism level, they happen at an entire ecosystem level. But importantly, for the conversation we're having here, they happen at microscopic scales in the soil as well. These changes and fluxes in water and nutrients that are and energy via carbon that are moving through the soil ecosystem rapidly. So grazing is a disturbance, as I was saying. The kind of mechanisms in which grazing is a disturbance is this idea of large-scale defoliation. And as Ned was kind of pointing out, the way that grazing works in vineyards is this idea of what we call high-intensity, short-duration, rotational grazing. And you can kind of see down here on the bottom right, these kinds of different types of stocking densities associated with grazing. We're on the very right here, we have this intensive rotational grazing, where we set up very small paddock sizes. We put a lot of animals in those paddock sizes, and we move the animals from one paddock to another rapidly, and we rotate them. So this has a benefit of essentially reducing the heterogeneity, or the kind of lack of what would be another way of describing heterogeneity. So you have heterogeneous and homogeneous. Heterogeneous would be kind of diverse and not uniform, whereas homogeneous would be more uniform. If you put a lot of animals into a small paddock, it results in a more uniform grazing pressure, where they're not selectively grazing the types of plants that they find more palatable, while leaving behind the more like weedy and less desirable plants. They're in more competition with each other and kind of graze more uniformly. And by rotating them, you actually allow for a longer rest period for recovery of the vegetation. And you would compare this to something like continuous grazing with no rotations, in which animals are just on a large landscape, whether it be a vineyard or a rangeland or a pasture, where they're kind of selectively grazing what they like and leaving behind what they don't, and the grazing pressure is bad. They might return back to a part of the pasture or the vineyard really quickly and not allow the recovery of the vegetation. And of course, another disturbance is the physical impact of the hooves actually on the soil. And so thinking about the timing in which we're putting animals in. And so kind of to the point of this credit, not necessarily being a carbon credit, but an ecosystem credit, we think about functions in soil health. And of course, one of those functions is stable and persistent carbon sequestration, something that we're all talking about, very important for the mitigation of global climate change. But there's other functions. One of those, kind of related to what I was talking about earlier, is this idea of internally regulating nutrients and internally cycling nutrients, which reduces the amount of external nutrients that we have to put into the system. And of course, those external nutrients have a petrochemical and greenhouse gas footprint associated with them. So one of the benefits of grazing animals is this idea that nitrogen, phosphorus in particular, become more bioavailable. It reduces the need to put external amendments into the system, and we've measured that. So it improves the efficiency of the system. We're also looking for the formation of soil structure, because that again is the physical habitat of the soil ecosystem, and you have to have good structure, lots of porosity in the soil for water and air to flow through, for biological activity to happen. And of course, the formation of this structure actually results in carbon sequestration. Formation of stable aggregates in soil physically protects soil carbon and reduces the ability of soil microbes to feed on that carbon, and that's really what results in persistent long-term carbon storage. And lastly, and really importantly, and not talked about very much, is this idea that we want carbon to be fluxing through the ecosystem commonly. And this is really what we found with grazing, is that grazing's its biggest impact is converting all of these plant residues, in which carbon is in like a very kind of structurally complex form inside of the plant, like leaves themselves and the roots, and it converts it into dung and urine, in which the carbon and nutrients are soluble, so they can move in water and soil solution and be more bioavailable and easily utilized by the soil microbial community. And this is really the driving mechanism that we found that increases the functionality in soil as a result of grazing in vineyards. I think I'll probably end on this slide, just kind of really trying to shape and frame again the idea that grazing as a disturbance has a couple of different direct and indirect mechanisms changes these carbon pathways. The first one is that grazing very much can stimulate what we call net primary productivity, or an overall greater amount of photosynthesis happening on a landscape. And there's a couple different mechanisms, but really skilled grazers like Chaos are very good at coming in and specifically targeting a certain amount of percentage of plants material that they want to remove, whether that be 40% or 80%, really skilled in this kind of high intensity rotational grazing gives them a lot more ability to be able to control how much vegetation they're pulling out of a landscape. And of course, like I said, this residue transformation into dung and urine, in which the carbon is more labile, or kind of a simpler form of carbon that can be more readily utilized. The energy in the carbon can be utilized and more soluble. And then a shift towards greater amount of root production in the vineyard as a result of grazing. And that root production is putting carbon directly into the soil ecosystem. The indirect mechanisms are the way in which grazing is an ecological tool to manage the actual plant community inside of the vineyard and the structure of that community, and be able to like kind of manage that community for a favorable population of the understory in a vineyard. And then that soil structure and using animals as a way to kind of aerate soil and kind of control soil structure. And I think I'll probably just end on that to not take too much time. And like, yeah, I mean, the approach that I'm trying to take here is this idea that there's a story and there's a narrative, and that narrative is greater than just carbon sequestration, right? And we could talk about carbon sequestration and the complexity of it, but ultimately carbon is also a form of energy that drives functions, and through driving functions, it displaces this kind of external need that has a carbon footprint associated with it as well.
That was amazing.
Cool.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Yeah, no worries.
Super helpful overview. I'm so excited to have a new credit based on ecosystem function instead of, like specifically carbon reductionism. It's really exciting. And thanks so much for all of the input that you've given into the process. So great.
Yeah, happy to. Really happy to. I appreciate just, we say a lot in the work that I do that all environmental problems are truly economic problems. And, folks face a lot of pressure to make certain kinds of decisions on the landscape. So the more that we can help people with the economic pressure, I think is, a driver of improving the environmental outcomes. So I appreciate it.
Well, and I want to be able to let you know, Kelsey, that especially last week when we were all together and really deeply workshopping a lot of the edges of the work that we do, that this project and all of the work that you did gets people really excited and grounded when there's a lot of noise and a lot of different opinions, but we can all agree that these practices are good and that this is what it takes to enable them to continue to happen. So it's very present tense for us, and was really grounding for our time.
That's great to hear. Thanks for that.
Just I know this is just sort of a side note here, and I know, Ned, you've been thinking about this, and we sort of did some design work for the kilo sheep hour grazing credit, or whatever we're calling it these days. But it would be cool to continue to dialogue a little bit around how these crediting systems also support research. So like the dual functions of supporting land stewards to adopt these practices that have clear ecosystem function upgrades clear health upgrades, and there needs to be sort of an economic driver to support the shift, right? It also seems to me that it's clear that we need to be funding kind of public research, about ongoing public research around this. And I know a percentage of the credits going in, but just like keeping in dialogue around that and kind of having an open door around how do we maintain funding for ongoing research in local areas where science departments can get engaged with research is, yeah, just really an important part of the sort of like holistic approach here. So I'm sure you guys are already on that, but just wanting to echo or reinforce that feels really important in all of this.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit there. So that if for those that aren't aware, 15% of the credit is set aside for data collection, and those data are used for knowledge generation. It's not used to directly influence the price of the credit. So that's what Gregory's talking about. And it's I mean, we're still working on building communities, and it's going to be it'll be very dynamic and an ongoing effort. But the way we're determining the price of these credits is basically trying to get enough money to do this practice. So we're not, trying to game the system and trying to make as much money as we can or anything like that. It's really, we have a target that we're aiming for. And that target is based right now on the wages that Chaos Sheep Grazing Outfit needs to stay in business, basically, because the state of California has recently changed some of their labor laws. And the price that they have to pay, the hourly wages they need to pay the grazing operators has gone way up, and they're running a deficit, and that's a huge issue. If we're going to keep this practice going, we need to meet that demand. So the price of this credit right now is $23.50, and that difference will get enough money into the into the grazing operator's pocket to stay in business, basically. So they're not making a profit. They're not, going to be buying new cars and this and that. That's what they need to stay in business. And that's what the whole intent is of this methodology. It's really just getting enough money to make the practices happen. So I don't know, we're running low on time, but do people have questions? I mean, Kelsey's here. He could probably, he's a great resource. If people have any specific grazing type questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm happy to stay on a little while longer as well.
Paul has a great question in the chat, just FYI.
But somebody repeat, I don't see it right now. What's next for Keel Sheep Hour? Data collection funding. So basically what we did was run a pilot using data that was collected last year. Now going forward, we want to start getting some people on board. We're still waiting for a few things on the regen side. We want to, and this should happen within the week or so, but we're trying to solidify the different roles and, find people to participate in some of these roles. So we can keep this practice going, and also work out fee structures so people signing up know what it's going to cost to create a project, and what other getting money into the crypto and back out into fiat, and what all these fees and costs are going to be. So hopefully within the next week or two, we'll be able to start kind of getting things set up for the grazing season, which will be coming this coming winter.
Could I ask a question of Kelsey? So in the presentation, it's really clear that soil health really excites you, and that's like a huge value of this work. We're at this narrative moment where we're thinking about how we can really build out a lot of exciting ways to communicate how cool this credit is, because we all know it's cool. What are other things that excite you about this credit? What are other kind of lines of storytelling or things that you think people would engage them enough to buy one of these credits?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Ned's point, I want to really call Ned out kind of here and just say, I think he did a wonderful job on this credit, and he had the right kind of value system in mind, and the right, I think the right mentality and who this credit was meant to serve. So I really appreciated working with you on that, Ned, because I think there's a lot of realities in which this kind of credit can be formed serving the wrong constituency, so to speak. And I work with these people all the time, and these people do really need support and help. And so, like I said, just really appreciate the degree to which this helps farmers. And for what it's worth, that's a real strong narrative. I think really talking about these folks as ecosystem stewards and talking about them as ecosystem engineers. And in the California context, where a lot of this work is and will continue to be going on, these grazers are not just necessary for, managing vineyards, but they do fire suppression grazing. There's a whole ecosystem built around the need to support contract grazers and the work that they do that our landscapes depend on and our ecosystems depend on. Our ecosystems are, at this point, inextricably tied to grazing and the viability of grazing, whether, and good targeted ecological grazing. Animals are an ecological tool to manage landscapes. And I think that framing is really important, and keeping the economic viability of people is really important. That being said, water is a big narrative. And I think the way that soil health impacts water is super, super strong here in terms of water retention, in terms of water storage, of course, groundwater recharge, but that's not so necessarily directed towards this. But I would say, like, in general, kind of to the point that Gregory brought up about this kind of carbon essentialism, so to speak, of carbon storage, or we call carbon sequestration, this narrative that carbon is energy, like I am carbon, right? And as I talk, I use the energy and the bonds of carbon in my body to convert it into kinetic energy, and I release CO2, right? Like, carbon is a fuel source for functions in ecosystems, and the degree to which we talk about carbon in a more nuanced and complex way is really important, because there's a whole carbon footprint associated with agricultural management, including all of the inputs we put into the system, all of the petroleum that's burned to drive tractors down rows. All of that is carbon, and all of that is greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation. And so just making it a more complex story than just carbon storage, and really talking about kind of what you could call a life cycle analysis of carbon, in the way that, like, sheep integration into ecosystems, for instance, displaces a lot of that kind of mechanization and external fertility reliance, et cetera.
Thank you. It's awesome to hear. Like, it's also spot on, and I think we just want to get that out. So I was writing. That was great.
I apologize. I actually do need to get going, but Ned's invited me to these meetings, and I intend to come for at least a little while. So hopefully I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. And thanks, Ned and team. This is really exciting. And I think, the opportunity to think about how to anchor the need for this in a way to continue to evolve our ability to anchor the need for this and the utility of this is really high. My brain is already spinning. I know David from Lowcom is thinking about that as well. So just thinking about how to really land this and market it, because I know that we'll find people who understand the need for this kind of localized ecosystem function support and direct payment for the people who are responsible for providing it. So let's figure out how to sell it.
Agreed.
And also, people should just go buy some, because I did, and it feels good.
Do it because it feels good.
Yeah, just a little. Right.
Any other parting thoughts from anyone before we jump off? Ned, anything from you?
Nope, just glad we got a chance to get this out, and it's just the spark to get things going.
Awesome. Well, appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice work.